With the top 32 of the Curious Journey seasonal happening this weekend, it seemed appropriate to highlight what is anticipated to be one of the most played decks, with the deck that ended at rank 1 on the America's ladder, Afaelios. My name is Boulevard, here for GiantSlayerTV, ready to break down the game plan of one of the new boogeymen and what sets it apart from decks like it before. Now, Fizz and Papercraft Dragon is not a revolutionary concept. It's one that saw quite a bit of play on release alongside Auction in a callback to the OG Ruin Runner build. So you take the explosive potential of that deck, you combine it with the Fae package from Yordles and Arms Demacia, and Afaelios is there. Did that leave you confused as to what's going on in the deck? Good, because normally I don't go through decks card by card, but because that generalization is so confusing, it feels appropriate to do so here so that you have a better understanding of every piece of this puzzle. In my Demacia Yordles and Arms deck profile, I lightly went over the math on the amount of Faes in the game to try and explain that Fae Sprout is a good card on average because more often than not, you are either going to hit a Librarian or one of the attach units, as well as just getting that +1/+1 is something that you are willing to pay that 1 mana for, and in this deck it kind of doubles down as the 1 mana burst speed spell for Fizz's sake to either gain elusive or dodge a tricky spell, and while not in every list, Trinket Trade does run in a similar vein. Now, for those of you that don't know me, I hate 1-drops, but Yordle Squire, I can't deny the heavy-hitting power of in a list like this, because for starters, it's going to put you at 6 1-drops, which is going to do a lot in terms of staving off early game boards and helping in those burn matchups that Voltron decks have traditionally struggled with a little bit, things like Pirates and Spiders. On top of that, this is a pretty spell-light list. There's only 14 spells in here, and that is with the addition of this optional Trinket Trade. So sometimes you can struggle to level your Fizz, so you need more units that generate spells, as well as getting a cheap Nightfall activator for Afaelios, because you can Yordle Squire on 1, past turn 2, and all of a sudden you can play whatever sword or shield you got onto the Squire to activate the Afaelios and get that gun train rolling a little bit earlier than normal, because there are no copies of Lunari Duskbringer in this list, which is an optional card. Kevor, the rank 1 player that I'm alluding to when I say this deck finished at rank 1, did play 1 copy of the Duskbringer in order to get an earlier access to Afaelios, as well as have that, again, cheap spell generation off of an early game unit. So you take those 6 1-drops, you add it to 10 2-drops. That's right, 25% of your deck is 2-mana followers. Now, Librarian missed out on being an S-tier fated unit in the same conversation as Wounded Whiteflame just because they're in Vandal City instead of Targon, so they missed out on making it into the Pantheon decks. But here, they get to be one of the many vehicles for a Formula 1 attach unit to hop in, win the game, or even just accumulate value with an Infernum from Afaelios. Now, obviously you could just try to connect this into the Nexus, but for those of us that have played Chempunk Pickpocket in the past, we know how difficult that can be. Your opponent is going to do everything in their power to make sure that this Nexus Strike ability does not go off. So you got to get a little tricky with Infernum or Rainbow Fish, and of course that Fated keyword is going to help you stay alive through things like Mystic Shot or the other things that would traditionally remove a 2 health unit. Then when we go down to Grandfather Fae, we're looking at something in a similar vein in terms of vehicles, where the Gleaming Lantern synergy is almost just an added bonus to the 3-attack Owlcat that you get, because that 3-attack Spell Shield unit can be a great tool to attach a unit on a Rainbow Fish or, do the Infernum Papercraft combo and try to win the game through decks that have a little bit more removal, or just something that is light on removal and will therefore have difficulty dealing with that spell shield. And again, you are not going to be one-shotting your opponent from 20 very often with this list. Generally, you're going to have to do a little bit more chip damage first. 14 to 16 is about the range that you're looking for on a good day in terms of one-shot potential. So the ability to go wide with the Grandfather Fae, get those Owlcats down, and just go in at your opponent, get that little bit of chip damage in necessary, is one of the reasons that Grandfather Fae is so good. And then Conchologist we can kind of just gloss over because it's a Vandal City staple. It makes sense in this list. And then Vandal Commando, this is another optional card. Not everybody is running this, but if you like the Owlcat strategy, then 1 or 2 copies of this card, as well as just having an inherent elusive within the deck that you can throw a Papercraft Dragon onto without needing to get fancy like you do for Fizz, is something that a lot of players are valuing and something that I personally am a big fan of. So I'm going to kind of gloss over Guiding Pale and Pokey here. They make sense in the deck. They're cheap spells for Fizz activation, for Afaelios activation, for your Fated unit and Assistant Librarian, but Flamespitter is something I do want to talk about because this is the first mainstream deck we've ever seen Flamespitter in, and some of you, rightfully so, I'm sure, are skeptical. So if you find yourself with a double attack unit with either Elusive or Overwhelm, which, spoiler alert, is pretty common in a list like this since that's most of what you're trying to do, Flamespitter is 2 mana for 6 damage, which is the most damage you will hopefully ever be able to choke out of a 2 mana spell in Legends of Runeterra in a common scenario, because building up to a Papercraft and a Fizz, that's not a combo that takes you 6 turns and 5 cards to do. It's something that just happens, especially when you include the math off of Face Sprout being able to potentially find you another Papercraft Dragon. And again, it doesn't have to be on Fizz. You can throw it onto the Bandle Commando or just combine it with Infernum. I know it sounds like a lot, but trust me, once you've played the deck, you'll find that it's pretty easy to run into a scenario like this. And even if you're not getting the 6 damage out of Flamespitter, it is Grant, which means if you really want to, if the monkey brain in you takes over and says we have to go back to the basics, we have to smork, you can just turn 1 Fizz, turn 2 Flamespitter, and now you have a 5 attack elusive effectively in terms of damaging your opponent's Nexus. So on turn 2, bam, there's 5 damage. Turn 3 rolls around, oh, I set up a Gleaming Lantern. Turn 4, look, I played a spell. Here's another 5 damage at the Nexus. You can chip your opponent down extremely quickly thanks to this card, and I would not cut it entirely. I've seen people go down to 1. I think going down to 1 is fine, but I would not cut it entirely. You gotta trust on this one. Now we kind of get into the stars of the show. Gleaming Lantern, obviously you look at all the Fey units in this deck, you remember that attached units are Fey, it all kind of comes together and makes sense. Rainbow Fish and Papercraft Dragon it's important to remember that attached units persist through transformation effects like Minimorph as well as negative effects like Quicksand. So if you Quicksand a unit that is attached with a Rainbow Fish, it will still have elusive because the Rainbow Fish persists through that. That is just how attached units work. Also worth remembering that the only way to get rid of attached units permanently is by obliterating the host, otherwise these units will just return to the hand when the unit dies, which is one of the reasons that this deck has so many resources at its disposal. If you just Vengeance the big Rainbow Fish unit, they get the Rainbow Fish back and then they make another big Rainbow Fish unit. But the real thing that set this deck apart from other decks like it in the past is Afaelios, by giving you consistent access to Overwhelm with Infernum, and very importantly, nearly single-handedly making the deck tier 1 by taking away your weakness to aggro. You see, Pirates and Spiders actually tremble in fear of Afaelios because 1 Severum is really all it takes to basically end the game. And with Rainbow Fish, it's nearly impossible to use Fervor to dodge the lifesteal like they try to do in a more traditional manner, or of course you can get the Severum Infernum combo so that nothing can possibly stop your lifesteal from connecting onto the enemy Nexus. So what separates this from your standard Voltron deck is the variety. A lot of these decks in the past only have 1 or 2 units, usually they're champions that they can all in on with some level of safety, and then if they do need to pick a different target for their pump spells to win the game, it's usually only a fraction as effective as getting it onto their main target. The addition of Rainbow Fish allows you to turn really any unit in this deck into a threat, but between Fizz, Librarian, and Hungry Owlcat, you also have a few different vehicles for these drivers to hop into to fit the scenario that you find yourself in. Additionally, you have Rally access with Fizz's Champion spell. It's neither here nor there, but it was kind of worth a shout out. And the big difference maker is, of course, the recently unnerfed Afaelios. Severum shores up that questionable burn matchup like I mentioned earlier. Gravitum is both a excellent defensive and offensive tool, and usually 1 Gravitum is both. You get to stun the elusive blocker on your opponent's turn, and now all of a sudden their elusive threat is not there to try to clap back onto you. Usually better on followers than champions, but it's neither here nor there again. And of course, having access to an infinite number of Infernum rather than being limited to only 3 Overwhelm spells if you're stuck on something like Zenith Blade or 3 Might or anything like that. Just having that constant access to the Infernum is a really big difference maker. 7 mana on a bad day, and you've got +4/+3 Overwhelm double attack, with a few different ways to reduce that cost all the way down to just 1 mana. So if it sounds like this deck has all of its bases covered, and nothing could possibly beat it, you're not actually too far off. Finding decks that have a good matchup, by which I mean a 55% or better win rate into this deck, is nearly impossible. Now there are of course a few, the most popular one being Scouts. The defensive capabilities of this deck pretty much start and end with Gravitum, so decks that go consistently wide with well-statted units are going to gobble up this deck of relatively low-power backline units. Additionally, the Afaelios deck has no removal for champions, meaning Misfortune has free reign to level up in really every game and just wreak havoc on the board, pick apart your units, whatever. And while Quicksand doesn't get rid of the elusive from a Rainbow Fish, Sharpsight still allows the deck to block your elusive if need be, making it very difficult to get in the chip damage that is usually needed to kill your opponent, as again, single 20 damage hits are very uncommon. Pantheon also has a good matchup into this deck, sitting just below a 55% win rate for similar reasons. Wounded White Flame is going to get taller than anything Afaelios can amass, and Afaelios isn't likely to stick around long to give you cards like Infernum or Gravitum on a consistent basis, as Single Combat, Concerted Strike, and Cataclysm all have his name written all over them, and you really need to pick between, am I going to Gravitum this Wounded White Flame, or am I going to get the Infernum that might let me end the game? You're generally not going to be able to get both, as Afaelios will usually be dying on sight. So if you didn't know what Afaelios did for one reason or another, maybe it got banned every time it was on camera, you're excited to watch the top 32, but you didn't really know what this deck did, now you know. Don't forget that you can check out all of the top 32 action this weekend at twitch.tv/Legends of Runeterra, and let me know in the comments below what you think of this Afaelios deck. Is it going to get nerfed with the release of the World Walker set, or are we going to have to wait a little bit longer? I don't even know if we're getting a balance patch with the World Walker set release, but a lot is set to change. Will this deck survive the transition? Let me know down below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Ring the little bell icon to get notified. And again, I have been Boulevard for GiantSlayerTV. Don't forget to check out the top 32 this weekend.